Oh, there we go. Sorry. First reading is Ecclesiastes chapter 1 to 2. 1 verse 2. Verses 12 to 14. Chapter 2, verses 18 to 23. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher, completely meaningless. I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under heaven. I soon discovered that God was dealt and tragic existence to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun, and really it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. I came to hate all my hard work here on earth, for I must leave to others everything I have earned, and who can tell whether my successors will be wise or foolish? Yet they will control everything I have gained by my skill and hard work under the sun. How meaningless. So I give up in despair, questioning the value of all my hard work in this world. Some people work wisely with knowledge and skill, then must leave the fruit of their efforts to someone who hasn't worked for it. This too is meaningless, a great tragedy. So what do people get in this life for all their hard work and anxiety? Their days of labor are filled with pain and grief. Even at night, their minds cannot rest. It is all meaningless. Book of Luke, chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. Then,
No, just I think I might have the wrong numbers on the screen.
oh,
No, just read the verses.
Just read what you got.
then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." Then he told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." Then he said, "I know. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?' Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." And that's the reading.
Thank you, Casadia, and may God bless the reading of his word. Storing up treasure. So everything is meaningless. Nothing like Ecclesiastes to bring a smile, isn't it? Whatever we do, build or accomplish, will pass away eventually. And it isn't just Ecclesiastes, it was in the Psalm as well. You can't buy your way out of death, it says. There's that poem about Ozymandias. It's a poem about a guy who's in the desert and he finds the remains of a giant statue, and it has the inscription that says, all you who read this, look upon my greatness, or something like this. And it's an example of the fact that no matter how powerful, no matter how rich, everyone comes to an end, and eventually most of what we've done gets forgotten. Wise or foolish, rich or poor, the psalm says, we all die. We all have the same destination, as it were, for the first part of our lives anyway. So man comes, it says, runs up to Jesus. It's rather interesting, right? Jesus is still on the road. And probably Luke has chosen this kind of language to continue to keep us in this feeling of movement and this feeling of progression towards something big that's going to happen. And our reading of the scriptures, have this story of Jesus on the road to Jerusalem broken up. And so we miss some of it. But if you were sitting in a house church, somewhere in the 1st century or the 2nd or 3rd century, and you were listening to someone reading from the book of Luke, and they were reading this part of Luke, or they would read, several chapters, you'd have these constant reminders in the way that Luke writes this story that Jesus is on the road. So much so that in this morning's story, we have this image of Jesus walking along and somebody running up to catch him to be able to ask this question or to be able to make this supplication. And it sounds kind of bossy for a supplication. He says, "Tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." That there must be land involved in order for this brother, who presumably must be a younger brother, because if he was the oldest brother, he wouldn't need anyone to tell him what to do, because he would be the one in charge. For this brother to want someone to get his older brother to divide the estate, there must be an estate. And in Jesus' culture, that means there's land. And in Jesus' culture, if there's land to divide between the children after the father dies, there must be a certain amount of wealth. Landowners are the wealthy in this culture. And so this younger brother wants his share of whatever the inheritance, whatever the property and the old holdings of the family are. And it has a bit of the feeling of the prodigal son story to it. Because this isn't a normal thing, right? It isn't normal that, for us it's normal that when, a parent passes away, you sell the estate, basically. You disperse of all of the goods, or you share them out amongst the children. But mostly you sell things off and then you share the money out equally. But in Jesus' culture, what more normally would have happened was the estate would stay together, and the oldest brother, the oldest son, would become now the patriarch of that holding, of that household, and the younger brothers would more often than not stay as part of that entire family and continue to work the land or to do whatever was necessary to make sure that the entire family continued to prosper. If the family was very wealthy, maybe they would be able to give portions of land or parcels off to other sons, but there would still be a connectedness. And the feeling of this passage is very much that of the prodigal son, where it's like, I don't want to wait, and I don't want my to be part of the bigger household, or I don't want to have to do what my older brother tells me to, or I don't want to work. I think that my share is enough to go out and have a good time. Whatever it is, he thinks that he's going to get Jesus, the teacher, to get him out of this situation and get him to where he wants to be. And what was Jesus' reaction? How does Jesus react to the fellow that wants him to intervene? He refuses, and it isn't even a very polite refusal, is it? He says, "What business is it of mine?" Essentially, he kind of puts the guy in his place, right? By saying, "What business is it of mine?" he's saying, no, this is, the way this works. You know how where your place is in this pecking order and stuff. You know how this all works. You don't come to me for that. But then he follows up with a teaching, right? That's Jesus. "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." Against every kind of greed. So Jesus has seen in this younger brother what? He's seen greed. He's calling him out, basically. First he just says, no, I'm not going to get involved in that. But then essentially he turns to his disciples or to the crowd or to whoever, and he says, beware, guard against every kind of greed. And he's making sure that everyone knows that not only is he not going to get involved in someone else's private affairs, but he's trying to point out that this is not the way this is not kingdom thinking. This is not the teaching that Jesus has come to be able to bring to the people who want to listen to him. And he wants to make sure that they understand the contrast. Every kind of greed, the looking for your own, the grasping after, the wanting your share, this is not what the kingdom is about. Life is not measured by how much you own. That doesn't sound like the message we usually get in modern culture, does it? In our culture, isn't the message we get that life is all about what you own, right? Your car, your house, your clothes, your motorboat, or your, whatever it is, right? And the more of it, the better. Because that means that you have been successful. In our culture, it means you're smart, you're wise, you're hardworking. You've accomplished these things, and the things that you've accomplished are represented by the things you own. But Jesus says that's not what life's about. Then he tells a story. He tells a story of a rich man. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. It's a nice story start, right? Except that the beginning of the story is very powerful, and it's a cue. A rich man. I've mentioned this before. In Jesus' culture, he's already called out the protagonist or antagonist of our story that he's going to tell. Rich men are not good people to most of Jesus' audience. Pretty much most of his disciples would not think of rich men as good people, because rich people have a bigger share of the pie. And in their culture, there's only so much wealth to go around. And if someone has a large portion of it, that means that other people have less. And by having more, it means that you have somehow taken more than your share. Now, maybe the rich people themselves didn't. Maybe it was their ancestors or whatever. But it's a reminder, if nothing else, of the imbalance in their society. But often, for the working class, the rich are thought of as somehow crooked or evil because they come by their wealth dishonestly. And I wonder if, as you listen to the story, you picked up on or would have been able to have seen how that bears itself out even in the story. He has a fertile farm and it produces fine crops. And in the story, it produces so many crops that the man has to ask himself, what shall I do? I don't have room for all my crops. I listened to Kaz reading that this morning, and I'm thinking, I wonder if Jesus' audience would have gotten the humor in that. I don't have room for all my crops. It sounds like we would call that a first world problem, wouldn't we? Don't have room for all of my wealth. And remember, in this culture, crops are not just, so much grain in a barn. That's gold. You live in a culture, and this story takes place in a culture where people's number one concern every day, and for most of the people that listen to Jesus, every moment of every day, except for maybe the little bit of time they're listening to Jesus, and even then it's probably their second thought. But for the rest of the time, the first thought, the first concern in their lives is food. Because it's a sustenance culture. It's a culture in which you must make sure that you have enough food to get through the day, enough food to have enough energy to go out and work tomorrow, and enough food to get you through the times when there is no harvest. Food is the economy of Jesus' culture. Being a rich man means that he has land that produce more crops than he and his family can eat. Being a rich man means that he has barns that can hold more food than they need to get through the year. Being a rich man means that he now has more crops than he can even put in the barns he already owns. What should he do? What should he do? Any suggestions? Yes, Cassidia. Give it to people in need. Well, that'd be a good thing, wouldn't it? What do you think would happen in that culture if he gave away a bunch of his grain? They might. People might demand more. What else? Economically speaking, what happens when there's an excess of produce? It's the opposite of what we're seeing right now in the grocery store. prices go down, right? So if this man gives away a bunch of grain, the poor eat, which is all the kingdom would be concerned with. The man himself and his rich neighbors would be concerned with the fact that the rest of their grain becomes worth less and can't be sold for as much money. And
Does he gain honor?
does he gain honor? He should gain honor by giving away the grain, but it doesn't seem like that even crosses his mind. What he really does is he says to himself, I'll tear down all my barns and build bigger ones. Does that sound at all familiar? Do we have people in our world or culture that live this life, that have so much that they have to start over again in finding a place to put it, to keep it? He wants to make sure that he has enough stored away for years to come. That's how good this bumper crop is. And again, the backdrop to this entire story is a fairly strong understanding by all of Jesus' audience that God provides the crops. That God provides it. What's the thing? We scatter the seed, but God provides the sun and the rain. I think that was in our song last week, wasn't it? They're very conscious of that. They're very conscious of the fact that if there's a really good harvest, this is a gift from God. As a matter of fact, they have festivals where they are required to give offerings. We call it first fruits, and we've talked about this before, that show that their gratefulness that God has once again brought harvest time, that God has once again blessed the land with bounty. This man should be going to the temple with a couple of I'm going to say tractors, but wagon loads full of produce and giving it away or something like that. But what he wants is to make sure that he has plenty stored up so that he can just take it easy for the rest of his life. Eat, drink, and be merry. What's wrong with this? What we've already talked a little bit about, right? Is there something wrong with him wanting to enjoy the benefit of his labors, of his shrewd farming practices? Should he not be able to have the benefits of his work, of his land? The problem is, and what Jesus' audience would be painfully aware of, is that hoarding causes hardship for the poorest. Sure, he provides for himself and his family probably more than he can ever use. But that's at someone else's cost. And this is especially poignant for Jesus' audience. Because remember, like I said about that pie, they live in a culture where they believe that there is only so much. And if one person is keeping the greater portion of the wealth, of the food in their barns, that means there is less food for everyone else. So every time someone goes hungry, it is because of the food he has stored in his bigger barns. Hoarding hurts the poorest the most. Excess food stored is food that the hungry can't eat. And we don't live in that big of a different world. You know, as I read the story, as I studied for this story, I just keep being reminded of, our world's billionaires or multi-billionaires. The richest man in the world is something like 70 billion in assets. He could never spend that money in his entire life, no matter how hard he tried. He makes more money than he can spend in a day on interest. It's what's the word? Oh, it's escaped me now. Too often, we find ourselves in a place where we say that, where we look at people who are wealthy and accomplished and stuff, and all we see is this idea of what's called the great American dream, or this recognition of someone's great accomplishments, their hard work, their cleverness, their smartness, and all the rest of it. But it's obscene, the amount of wealth that many people in our world have, when there are so many people that have nothing. And the question, I guess, the other question is, what about our rich? What about our rich? We have the mega rich. What about just the rich? Maybe just millionaires. What about ourselves when we compare ourselves? We're not rich in the standards even of this story that Jesus was telling. Few of us are in a situation where we have to worry about tearing down barns and building new ones, or finding new tax shelters, or, whatever the case may be. But if we compare ourselves to people in many places in the world today that are starving because of famine, we'd look awfully rich to them. Jesus warns at the beginning of his story about all kinds of greed. And I think the problem is, the challenge is that how difficult it is for us to be able to identify for ourselves what is greed and what is simply trying to take care of our families, or take care of ourselves, or make sure that we don't become a burden, or other legitimate concerns. No one, well, that's not true. I'm not suggesting that we all become paupers tomorrow, because I just don't know how that works, right? I know that in the early church, many people were selling things and giving things away and sharing things in common. But we don't have a picture ever in church history, and if you want to double check me on this, you can talk to Matthew Hoskins when he's here in a couple of weeks. That's his specialty, that's what his doctorate is in early church history. But I'm not aware of any history that tells us that everybody in the church became destitute. There was always people that had the means to help each other, or to take care of themselves somehow, is the impression we get. But we need God's help to examine our own lives and our own situations and to ask the tough questions. In Jesus' story, God says to the rich farmer, he says, "You fool, you will die this very night, then who will get everything?" Just like Ecclesiastes and the Psalm, right? Everything, especially Ecclesiastes, over and over again. I really heard this morning the writer's sort of bitterness. I was going to say anguish, but it sounds a lot like bitterness, that everything he's worked for is going to be inherited by somebody who doesn't deserve it. I don't think he has a lot of respect for his children, apparently, is the way it sounds. What a burden for a father that's worked hard and used his wisdom to build up good things, to see that he may only have foolish children who he knows are going to squander and destroy whatever he's built. And for a king, that means it could mean a lot of bad things for the people too, not just his own legacy. It can be a bad thing for everybody. And I'm sure there are businessmen that have built large businesses that have employed lots of people that have had to worry about passing on their business to children that might not run it well, and that a city or town or a whole group of people will suffer because of that. We can't take it with us, is the reminder of Jesus' story. A person is fool to store up earthly wealth but not have a rich relationship with God. Is it possible to store up wealth and have a rich relationship with God? Not rhetorical.
It must be.
It must be?
You wouldn't be a fool.
Because it's worded that way? Okay.
There must be a limit, like you're talking extravagance in this story.
Yes.
Is what it is. Okay?
Yes.
It's not just enough for his family for the years, you're talking enough so that he doesn't have to do anything anymore, and there was a thing on Facebook that said, if you have work, don't build a higher fence, build a longer table.
Right.
Which I think is like this story.
I'm going to repeat that one because it probably didn't come through. Brenda shared a quote from probably a Facebook post that said, if you have more wealth, don't build a higher fence, build a longer table. as an explanation of her comment that there's a limit, that there's a limit to what you, it's about what you do with your wealth, and it's about how much you want to hold on to. Adam, was there a comment you were going to make?
I was just going to say, there must be a balance that can be had, because there have been pious kings. So even rulers of nations can have a good relationship with God, and, their wealth is a nation.
Okay. Adam is pointing out that there have been pious kings and that rulers of nations can have a good relationship with God, and there can be a wealthy nation. That's one of the story arcs of the Old Testament, is that God blesses the good kings that listen to the law and that take care of their people. So Jesus' message isn't that he wants everyone to be poor. His message isn't that he doesn't want people to strive for something better. But that's not what the story was about, was it? And that was Brenda's comment as well. The story isn't about just wealth. The story is about more wealth than one really needs, and what the person's attitude towards that wealth was. His thoughts weren't like Casadio's thoughts, give it away. His thoughts were, tear down my barns and build bigger ones. I think that says it all, right? I have wealth. I have more wealth than most people around me, but I want even more because I never have enough. And that's pretty much the essence of greed, isn't it? I want more because I never have enough. And that's what Jesus is warning about. And I think the final thing that he says, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth but not have a rich relationship with God, is there's two folds to that, I believe. The first is the obvious one that we read in Ecclesiastes, right? You can build up all the wealth you want, but you have no control over when you die. You can be wealthy and healthy and take care of yourself and have the best doctors in the world, and something can still happen that's unexpected, and you'll be dead the next day. The psalmist, you cannot buy extra life. It doesn't work that way. That's what part of the message is, that it's foolish to store up wealth and not have a rich relationship with God. The other part of the message, I believe, is that when we have a rich relationship with God, we aren't as foolish, because God gives us guidance and helps to keep us in check. And like I mentioned earlier, right, we don't see greed in ourselves all the time. We are conditioned and we are programmed to want to build up a nest egg, to want to be safe, to want to have all these things. We have proper urges and desires to care for our families and for people around us, and to be able to be generous. But often, the growing of wealth blinds us and keeps us wanting to move forward. This is what happens to a lot of rich people. Now I'm talking about the really rich people, right? Is they just get into the habit and the mindset of always needing to add more, that becomes their goal in life. And I think that when we have a rich relationship with God, we have some measure of protection against that. Because a rich relationship with God means that we're going to God, that we're showing our gratitude to God, that we're being moved by God to be a more generous people and to use the gifts and the wealth that God gives us in ways that bless others. Please join me in prayer. Generous giver, you pour forth your extravagant bounty without measure upon your whole creation. Teach us such generosity that the fruits of our spirits and the works of our hands may be used for the building of your commonwealth of blessing. Father, how true those words are. It is your generosity. It is your great gift of creation and life that allows us to have anything. And we are so grateful that we live in a place and a time where we are not struggling like so many others on our planet, Lord. Lord, we ask that you forgive us for the times in which we participate in mechanisms that make our part of the world richer and other part of the world's poorer. Teach us how to live lives that don't do that. Teach us how to continue to have a rich relationship with you, driven by a desire to bring your kingdom into reality, Lord. A kingdom where we are concerned more for the poor and the weak and those on the fringes than we are for our own wealth and our own futures, Lord. A kingdom where we trust you for ourselves and where we ask you to use us to help others. Dear Jesus, it is difficult in the world we live in to always cultivate those kinds of thoughts and hearts. And so we really ask and pray that your Spirit would give us the wisdom, the guidance, and the strength to be generous people, to be people who are more concerned with our relationship with you and the Father than we are with wealth and taking care of earthly things. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.